Morning.
Good morning, Secretary of State. We weren't sure we were going to have you there for a second. But we've been reporting this morning that Gideon Falter of the campaign against anti-Semitism was told by a police officer that being openly Jewish, whatever that means, was a provocation to pro-Palestinian demonstrators. Should this be a resignation issue for Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner?
Well, look, I think what happened was completely wrong. It's not right that one group of people in society should be told that they can't go around their daily lives because it might be a provocation to someone else. That's not how equality works in this country. So I do think they've got it wrong. I think it's right that they've apologised. And ultimately what happens next is a matter for the Labour London Mayor, who has the responsibility to hold the Met to account.
Oh, so it's a matter for the mayor, and you wouldn't be disturbed if he said, you know what, I think Sir Mark's time is up.
Well, I think what is really important is that people of different communities feel that they can trust in the police. And I think when you've had a situation like this, it's right that action is taken, because you can't have a position where one group of people, one identity, the Jewish community in this case, are being told they can't go about their daily lives because that might be a provocation. That is not how policing is meant to work. That's not how society can work. So I know the Home Secretary has also written to the police, and they'll be meeting with ministers in coming days, but I do think this is a matter for the Labour Mayor. He does have accountability when it comes to the police, and it's for him to make sure that the right action is taken.
Well, I notice you're not saying no to the idea that Sir Mark might have run out of time, and your colleague, the Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden, has been even more trenchant. He said that no other minority group would be treated like this. Do you agree with him?
Well, look, it's hard to imagine, right? You can imagine walking around London and being told that because of your identity, you might be risking a threat of violence, therefore you shouldn't be doing it. That's not how we expect any group to be treated. So I do think what's happened is completely wrong. I can understand why the Jewish community have felt very upset by it, but we don't want to see that for any identity or any group. That's not how a society can work. It's not sustainable.
All right. The big news overnight is the decision by Congress to send $60.8 billion worth of arms to Ukraine's defence forces. It's not as much as the Ukrainians wanted. Is there a danger that we're doing enough to help the Ukrainians avoid defeat, but not enough to give them victory, and that we're in a stalemate that really is just going to mean more smashed and devastated Ukrainian cities and hundreds of thousands of dead?
Well, I think this is a step forward. This is positive news. It's something that the Foreign Secretary has been arguing very vigorously for. And as you'll know, Trevor, we have been at the forefront of supporting Ukraine since the war started. And it's really important that we do that, because this is a fight for democracy. It's about all of our security. So I do think this is good news. And, as the Foreign Secretary has said, we have put forward substantial amounts to make sure that we can support Ukrainians, both in terms of military support and otherwise. But actually, America is the keystone in the arch. I think that's the phrase that he's used. And this is positive news.
Well, we're 2 years in now. I mean, what is the end game here from your point of view? Is it that we are still hoping for Ukrainian victory? Is it that we want them to last long enough to create a negotiated settlement? I mean, presumably, the strategy can't simply be to keep going as it is now.
Well, we've found that every time we've supported the Ukrainians, they've used that support well. They have been able to push back on Putin, and ultimately we need to stand by them when it comes to this war. Ultimately, that's not just in their interest, it's in all of our interests, which is why the UK has taken such a leading position on this. And actually, when it comes to the US, as you spoke about, the Foreign Secretary has been at the forefront. He's been over to the States to make this case. We feel very passionate about this, that we need to do this, we need to support the Ukrainians, and that is the right thing for all of us.
Is Lord Cameron claiming some credit for the decision in Congress. I gather he talked to Mr. Trump.
Well, look, he's doing this in all humility. I think, as he said, he wasn't, there to lecture anyone. He just wanted to encourage, and that's because, the UK does feel very strongly about this. And actually, ever since the war started, and you can point to the actions of lots of people, whether it was Ben Wallace putting in training schemes, both prime ministers, everybody has been very clear that we're united in this, that we need to support the Ukrainians in this battle.
All right. We have an interview by my colleague Ed Conway with Liz Truss, which we'll be playing later in the programme. She told Ed that she no longer thinks that the legislation on net zero is right. You didn't reckon with the actual costs. Is she wrong?
Well, so if you take a step back, I would say look at our record when it comes to net zero. We are the first country of any major economy to halve emissions, but crucially, we have done that in a way that has also made sure that the economy can grow. So the economy's grown about 80% in that time. And my priority as Energy Secretary since I've come in is to make sure that I can keep bills down for people. That's been the biggest challenge that people have had over the last couple of years, and that's my absolute priority. So at the moment, you've got to choose in government where you prioritise your time. My focus is on making sure I can bring bills down, that I can keep the lights on, and that I can deliver what we need to in climate change without heaping costs onto families.
Yes, I'll come to all of that, but that isn't the answer to the question I asked you. The question I asked you was, is Liz Truss wrong when she says that you miscalculate, or in fact you didn't calculate on the cost of net zero, and that the legislation you put through is wrong? Do you welcome her contribution to the debate around net zero?
Well, look, I think everybody should be able to have an open debate about what net zero means. And if you look at the steps since I came into post, we have made some changes to what we're doing. What we're doing is turning up the dial when it comes to investment, because we want to see jobs in this country. We want to see high quality jobs, which is going to improve people's incomes in different parts of the country. But also, we are being really pragmatic when it comes to the personal choices that people are having to face. So whether it's their cars or their boilers,
I just want to give you one more.
I
just want to give it one more go. Is Liz Truss just wrong in what she said, or?
Well, this is the point that I was coming to, so I am answering your question. The point is the legislation hasn't stopped me doing that, so we have been able to take a measured approach when it comes to what's happening to people's cars and their boilers, but we are also able to turn up the dial on investment, and I've been able to do that within the legislation. So in government, you have to choose how to spend your time, and my priority is making sure that I can bring people's bills down and protect household finances.
Well, the reason I'm pressing this is that I wonder if you have a little bit of sympathy with her. You say you're committed to net zero, but actually, since you've been there, you've done a number of things. You've moved back the point at which petrol and diesel cars are banned to 2035. You've moved the boiler switchover back some years. You've exempted some homes completely from new boilers, and you scrapped the home insulation scheme. That's all just for starters. Whatever you say, your actions suggest that you've actually abandoned hope of getting to net zero by 2050, and that you just think what you mean by realism is basically, in practice, backing off your original aim.
Well, look, I completely reject that, because what I've also done at the same time is increase the amount we're spending on home insulation, keeping people's homes warm. What I've done is also made sure that we're getting more investment in the country. So since I've been in post, we've had £30 billion of investment into the energy sector in this country because of the changes that we're making. So in some areas, we're dialing up when we think it's positive for the country, it's going to increase jobs, it's going to grow the economy. But in some areas, I make no apology for the fact that yes, we are going to take a careful approach, and that's not just us, by the way. We've seen other countries do the same, because I think this is the crucial point, Trevor. What we want to do is work with the grain of public opinion. People do want us to tackle climate change. I firmly believe they care about that, but they don't want us to heap costs on them when they see us as 1% of global emissions and other countries' emissions are rising. So they want us to do this in a positive and measured way, and that's exactly what we're doing.
Are you sure you're not just looking over your right shoulder at Mr. Richard Tice and the Reform Party, who say that basically your addiction to net zero is a sort of lefty thing, that you're basically a lefty wolf in Tory sheep's clothing?
No, look, so in this job, you've got some people who would say scrap the whole agenda, which I don't think is the right thing, because then you're not future-proofing the economy, you're not preparing for the industries of the future. I don't know if they want us to cancel the investment we're making into nuclear, for example, but I think that's pretty important to keep the lights on. And on the other side, you've got the Labour Party, who want to go too fast, too quickly, which industry has said would leave the country uninvestable, which would pile costs onto family, hike up their taxes, and I also don't think that's the right approach. We are going to get there because we think this is really important in the long term, but we're going to do this in a sensible way.
Before you pile into Labour, let's deal with what seems to be the real political threat to you. Reform's taking a lot of vote from you, as far as polls are telling us. You're one of the Prime Minister's trusted associates, and some of your colleagues think that the way things are looking, he should put the country and party out of its misery, call a general election before the summer. Between you and me, Sky tells me they want me to be around the campaign. Should I book my holidays for June and July, or do I need to be around?
Well, look, that is unfortunately way above my pay grade, but what we're focused on is making sure that we can improve lives in this country.
What's your feeling like?
So if you look at... So he is fighting to get across our agenda, make sure that we can improve people's lives. So if you look at the steps that he's taken, what he's doing is he's cutting taxes, putting £900 back in people's pockets because of the cuts to national insurance. He wants to end the double taxation when it comes to work. He's improving public services. He's trying to make sure that we can address some of the difficult challenges we have in this country when it comes to illegal immigration. And that's the point that we're getting across.
Forgive me, because your colleagues tell me that every Sunday morning. And if this is all so fantastic, why is it that for a year the poll gap with Labour hasn't moved, Reform has eaten into your vote, and you're now down in some polls below 20%?
Well, look, the country has been through a really difficult time, and I think people have had a cost of living crisis thanks to Putin's war in Ukraine and a pandemic. And actually what we are doing is rebuilding the country, making sure that, like I said, we've got a growing economy, that we can use that growth in the economy to put more money back in people's pockets and protect public services. So actually, we've had, we were meant to go into a deep recession, and actually the actions of the Prime Minister, the steps that he's taken to protect the economy have shielded us from that. And you look at what's happening in other countries, Trevor, actually other countries are faring quite badly, and the fundamentals in our economy are good. And that means something, because that's people's jobs and livelihoods and our ability to cut taxes.
OK, and I know you've got to go, so let me just ask you one last question. Let me just put an alternative explanation for this, and this is to do with the Prime Minister himself. Everybody agrees that he has virtues that one might say were absent in his immediate predecessors. Intellectually capable, financially tech literate, personally moral. He could have been remembered as the Chancellor who got us through COVID. It looks now as though he'll be the Prime Minister who took the Tories into the wilderness. Is the problem that you've got that your leader just isn't very good at politics?
So actually, I think what's happening at the moment is actually you don't see people being very attracted to the Labour Party. It's just there's an awful lot of people who are in the don't know column.
No, I'm asking about your leader, not Labour. I'll deal with them separately. What about your leader?
I'm making. So the point that I'm making is that what we need to do is make sure that we're getting across the positive message that we have about the things that we want to do for the country, like making sure that we've got cheap energy bills, making sure that we can cut people's taxes. And actually, on the other side, I do think we need to point out the faults of the Labour Party, because on the one hand, they're a strange mix of being overly cautious. You don't know what they're going to do on the economy or childcare, for example. And then in my area, in energy, they are wildly reckless, because what they want to do, Trevor, and this is important that people understand this, is they want to shut down the North Sea, make the country uninvestable, and actually heap costs onto families. And that is something that we do need to talk about, because it's going to make a real difference to people's lives.